Hey guys, so today I'd like to talk about airsoft batteries. In this video I'm going to go in depth with everything you're going to want to know about batteries that are used in airsoft. We're going to talk about everything. We're going to talk about chemical makeups, voltage ranges, what the C ratings are. By the end of this video I'm hoping you're going to know everything there is to know about batteries in airsoft. So let's get started. The very first thing you want to know about batteries in airsoft is that there's three main batteries that we're using. And these batteries are categorized by their chemical makeup, basically what's inside the batteries. First of all, you have nickel metal hydride batteries, shortened to NIMH. You'll know they're nickel metal hydride batteries first because of the shape. They're usually round tubes, either one or two connected together. And you can see specific cells inside of them. We'll get to that later. The second category that we use are lithium polymer batteries, which are way more common in airsoft. And you'll know that you're working with a lithium polymer battery because they tend to be a little bit more square, and they usually have a charger port at the end. So you can see this only has one output port. These have two connectors over here. The third one, which I don't have with me, is relatively new on the scene. They are using lithium ion technology. Specifically, the brand Titan uses these types of batteries as well. So just remember, nickel metal hydride, lithium polymer, and lithium ion. These are the three main batteries that we use to power our airsoft guns. First, let's talk about nickel metal hydride batteries. Okay, so let's go through a quick pros and cons about nickel metal hydride batteries. The pros is that they're relatively stable, they're very simple to charge, be it with just one port, and they're relatively cheap. Now let's get on to the cons. The biggest con with nickel metal hydride batteries is that they don't provide as much power as you would like. This means you're going to have a slower rate of fire, slower trigger response. And that's why most people don't use these type of batteries. Nickel metal hydride batteries are batteries that are charged and discharged using the same connection port. A battery pack like this consists of multiple nickel metal hydride cells connected together in series. Each cell individually is a nominal voltage of 1.2 volts. We'll talk about nominal voltage later in the video. And in airsoft, you usually have a group of 8 cells. So you can see there's one here, 2, 3, 4, and then you double that and you get 8 cells. So 8 times 1.2, that's 9.6 volts. Airsoft also uses 9 cells, which gives you 10.8 volts, and 10 cell batteries, which give you 12 volts. So if you see nickel metal hydride batteries that say 9.6, 10.8, or 12 volts, you know how many cells are inside. Let's get on to how we use these batteries. So one of the biggest things that sets these batteries apart from others is how they're charged. They are charged using a very basic wall outlet. These are specific to the voltage of your battery, and usually if you buy a battery you should find a charger that matches it. Specifically the voltage and how fast it's charging. When you're charging a nickel metal hydride battery, the biggest thing to note is that these can be overcharged, and that will damage the battery. Let me step back here. There are two ways to charge a nickel metal hydride battery. One is trickle charging, where you're charging it very, very slowly to preserve the life of the battery. But the far more common way of charging the battery is fast charging, where you're really just pushing it and charging the battery to the maximum capacity. And usually those are what these chargers do. The issue with that is that these chargers are what I like to call dumb chargers. They keep on charging the battery and they don't really tell you when to stop. And that's just an inherent characteristic of the chemical makeup of these batteries. So usually on batteries like these, they will have a specific stat where it tells you how long to charge it for. I believe here you can see it says a standard charge of 14 hours at 106 milliamps. Basically you're running 160 milliamps of current for 14 hours, and you really don't want to charge it for more than 14 hours, or else there's going to be a little bit of gas buildup in the chemical makeup of the battery, and you're really going to start like puffing it if you overcharge it too much. So make sure you only charge it to the recommended amount. With nickel metal hydride batteries, they are relatively safe as long as you keep in mind the charging. They're not really going to fail on you that badly. The issue, and the big issue with nickel metal hydride batteries, is that they don't output a lot of power. I'll get more into this specifically as we move on to the LiPo batteries. But what you need to know is that the nickel metal hydride batteries have very low C ratings, which means it can't really push out as much current as your airsoft gun demands. What this ends up resulting in is a very low fire rate, where you pull the trigger and it winds up for a pretty long time before it actually shoots out. Or it will have issues where you pull the trigger and the motor's trying to spin, but because there's a spring that's very compressed in your gearbox, it might not spin, it might just click. They don't really help your rate of fire. They're very slow, and I don't really use them. They are good if you are worried about like fires breaking out when you're using lithium polymer lithium ion batteries, which we'll get into. Alright, next up are the old lithium polymer batteries. This is going to be the most common battery used in airsoft, and for good reason. They provide a lot of power in a very small package, while also giving you a pretty long battery life, especially when compared to lithium metal hydride batteries. The biggest thing that I need to get out right away when you're running lithium polymer batteries is that you have to be aware that these have significant fire risks, and if you don't take care of them properly, they can have a significant risk to them. This is something that you're going to have to be aware of moving forward. Alright, so let's talk about the proper storage and maintenance of a LiPo battery. This is very important. Rule number 1, do not under any circumstances break or puncture one of these cell bags. This will start a fire, and it cannot be put out by water. Battery fires are very dangerous and very hard to put out. If you take anything away, just make sure you take proper care of these batteries. Let's talk about how to charge these batteries. You're going to need to use a balanced charger. This is a balanced charger. You basically charge it through these ports right here. You plug it in, and then it will charge for you. This is the safe way to charge the battery. It's best to put this in a fireproof LiPo bag while it's charging, just to be safe, prevent any battery fires. I'll get more into the details about battery charging later in this section here. Ideally, if you can, you're going to want to store your batteries at the nominal voltage. Basically, measure the voltage of your output source, of your output connector, and make sure that it matches the voltage on your battery. If you have an 11.1 battery, make sure the output's reading 11.1 volts, and then you can store it. If you have a 7.4 volt battery, same thing, measure it's 7.4 volts. That's the ideal voltage range you'd like to have when you're storing your battery. Can you store it fully charged, fully discharged? Yes, it's not that great for the battery, especially when you store it fully discharged. Okay, so let's get into specific details about lithium polymer batteries. These batteries are composed of multiple lithium polymer cells, or as if you see them, they actually look more like pouches. Each cell or pouch contains a nominal voltage of 3.7 volts. This is where you get your 7.4 volt batteries and then 11.1 volt batteries. You can think 3.7 volts, you have two pouches, that gives you 3.7 times 2, which is 7.4 volt batteries. If you have three pouches, you get an 11.1 volt battery, 3.7 times 3. So let's get into more specifics here. The battery has two connectors that come with it. One is for a discharge port. This is wired to the positive terminal of the most positive cell, and then the ground terminal of the most negative cell. These connectors are what you're going to be used to charge the battery. They will have a common positive, so the red wire on this output cell is actually connected to the same thing as this red wire. So this is, in this example, providing 11.1 volts. These following wires mark the negative outputs of each individual cell in the system, right? So we have a positive wire for 11.1 volts. This blue wire is going to be a 7.4 volt line. The white one is going to be another 3.7 volts down. This is going to be 3.7 volts. And then the black wire is going to be the bottom of the last cell. So it's going to be your ground, your 0 volts. All right, so why am I talking about cells? Why is there a different connector for LiPo batteries anyways? Well, lithium polymer batteries are a little more convoluted in terms of their battery chemistry. They're a little bit more volatile. Like I said before, big fire risk. In order to avoid that, you're going to need not just a regular charger, but a specific balance or smart charger. What this does is that instead of charging it from the output port, it charges each individual cell on its own. What's the difference? If you were to charge just from the output port on all of these cells, the individual cells may charge at different rates. So for example, the first cell might be fully charged, the second cell might only be half charged, and the third cell might not even be charged at all. Lithium polymer batteries do not like to be unequally charged within their cells. So basically what you need to do is buy a balance charger and charge each individual cell individually. Basically what this does is that it makes sure that each cell in the battery gets charged at the same time. So if they're all fully dead, they'll get charged up to 50% at the same time. They'll get charged to 100% at the same time. Okay, so all this talk about charging cells and voltage and whatnot, let me get into a deeper dive about voltage. Even though a battery says that it's 11.1 volts, if the battery keeps getting charged or is more full, it will increase in voltage. For a LiPo battery, a fully charged cell actually has a voltage of 4.2 volts. And a fully dead cell, meaning it's completely empty, actually has a voltage of 3 volts. So you're basically playing in that voltage range between 4.2 and 3. If you have a fully charged battery, the more you discharge it, the less voltage is going to be in your battery. We call this the voltage curve. For a LiPo battery, I'll pop an example up on the screen right now. How this is useful is that you can actually figure out how charged your battery is just by measuring the output voltage of the battery. Basically just multiply everything on the chart by 3 or 2, depending on whether you're using 11.1 or 7.4 volt battery, and you can generally get an idea of how charged it is. You will notice on the curve that I showed before that the battery kind of likes to stay in a range at the middle of 3.7 volts. That's why we call this the nominal voltage, because that's where the battery likes being when it's for most of its life. That's why batteries are defined as 7.4 or 11.1 voltage. They're basically taking that sweet spot on the battery. So this is a very important thing to note. You will notice that the power voltage of the battery drops off very quickly after it hits the 3 volt range. Don't ever fully discharge your LiPo battery. If it's starting to shoot slow or sluggish, just disconnect the battery, find a new one. It will save the life of your LiPo battery. If a LiPo battery is fully discharged to 0 volts, you will not be able to recharge it again. It's basically a completely dead battery. There are very specific instances where you can revive a battery like this, but outlook's not great. So if it starts to slow down when you're shooting, just switch out the battery. Another thing for storage, make sure when you store it, you're storing it at the rated temperature range. You don't want to store it in a place that's too hot. You don't want to store it in a place that's too cold. This means don't leave your battery in your garage when it's super hot or when it's winter outside. That will damage the chemistry in these batteries. Follow these rules and steps. You'll make sure your battery lasts a pretty long time. and is well cared for. Okay, so another thing I want to hit on about LiPo batteries is why do they get puffy? You'll see puffy batteries in a lot of airsoft guns. This is mostly due to two factors. One is improper care of your battery, which I've mentioned before. The other is just basic use. As you constantly charge and discharge the battery, there is going to be some lost potential in your battery. It basically starts wearing over time. This will basically be shown as some gases building up inside your LiPo battery, and they will start puffing up a little bit. A lot of people say as soon as you see a LiPo battery start to puff up, it's a completely dead battery. You want to get rid of it and buy a new one. Personally, from my experience, you can get away with a slightly puffy battery. Generally, these materials are made from a kind of elastic coating. They are designed to stretch a little bit. It will puff up long before you will actually need to replace it, but just keep in mind a puffy battery is a sign that your battery is starting to die. And you should consider switching for a new one, because as batteries get more puffy, they're more easy to be punctured, and a punctured battery is a battery that gets set on fire. So don't do that. Okay, so let's talk about using LiPo batteries in airsoft. Specifically, whether you should use a 7.4 volt LiPo battery, an 11.1 volt LiPo battery, or anything bigger. Generally speaking, you're going to want to run the highest voltage LiPo battery that you can if your gun is built for it. Some airsoft guns aren't built for the amount of current and the amount of power that these batteries can provide. Specifically, there's a big problem when it comes to pulling your trigger. The inside of an airsoft gearbox and how an airsoft gun works when you pull the trigger is that the trigger is connected to a sliding mechanism that basically just shimmies two pieces of metal together and it completes the circuit. The issue comes when you juice up a lot of power in your airsoft gun. When you pull the trigger, as these two metal plates come together, when they're very, very close together but not touching yet, there will be an arc of electricity that sparks. Think of it as like static shock, right? From one contact to the other through the air before you're fully connected. This is an issue because the arc will actually start burning the metal on your trigger contacts. If it burns it enough, you will run into problems where you pull the trigger and because it's so burnt, it won't register a proper connection. There's a side tangent where this also happens inside your motor if your motor isn't up to spec as well, but I'll talk about that in a future video. If you have a 7.4 LiPo battery, this trigger contact system will work fine. You have a basic airsoft trigger and it won't arc as severely for you to actually need something more. If you want to go for a higher power 11.1 LiPo battery, you'll need something that's called a MOSFET. This basically solves the arcing problem. This is a battery video, so if you want an entire video about how MOSFETs work, let me know. The quick version of it is that your trigger suddenly, instead of 11.1 volts, is only a 5 volt signal, and then it sends all of your power to your motor instead. Super quick version. If you want an actual detailed video of MOSFETs, let me know that in the comments. Keep in mind that if you do have a MOSFET, you're going to want to unplug your battery at the end of every game. I'll get into that more, but MOSFETs will drain your battery over time. So yeah, use an 11.1 volt LiPo if your AEG has a MOSFET inside of it, and use a 7.4 volt LiPo if your AEG doesn't have a MOSFET inside it. Even with a 7.4 volt LiPo, these will outperform these nickel metal hydride batteries. Okay, so in the world of LiPo batteries, we do have 2-cell batteries that are 7.4 volts, 3-cell batteries that are a lot more powerful, that are 11.1 volt batteries. You might be thinking, okay, what if I wanted to increase the power even more? Can I get a 4-cell battery that is 14.8 volts? And the answer is actually yes. You can technically get a LiPo battery that has 4 cells in them that is 14.8 volts, and they will give you more power. I do not recommend going this route. Let me tell you why. The first issue with 14.8 volt batteries is that most airsoft guns aren't designed to handle the power like this. A lot of MOSFETs will actually break down at 14.8 volts, and if you don't have a MOSFET especially, they will start sparking on your trigger contacts. The bigger issue is that it will actually start sparking on the internal components of your motor, and that is a issue that is hard to solve because a lot of airsoft motors aren't designed for 14.8 volt batteries. You also start running into a lot of issues when it comes to the internal components of your battery. A stronger motor means you're going to have a lot more wear on your gears, on your pistons, on your springs, and it's very, very difficult to get something dialed in like this. The second big problem is that, I mean, look at the size of this thing. You need to fit 4 cells in here, which means generally these batteries end up being huge. They're mostly used for like RC applications, drones, RC cars, not really designed for an airsoft application. This means that you're probably not going to be able to fit this in your buffer tube, and I would highly recommend against taping this to the side of your buffer tube or the side of your gun, because if a BB impacts this, you're going to start damaging your LiPo cells, which increases the risk of a fire. So yeah, those are the general reasons why I do not like running 14.8 volts in my airsoft guns. They really just aren't designed for it. But one of the reasons that I see people running this is that it makes their previously not well-tuned gun feel like it runs a lot better. What do I mean by this? If you have an airsoft gun that isn't properly shimmed, that's too tight, or if you have the incorrect components on your airsoft gun, you can use a 14.8 volt battery to brute force through everything, to force the motor to spin a lot harder, and it will feel like you're having a higher rate of fire. The only issue is that you're still not attacking the core reason why it's breaking down like that, be it your shimming or your bad motor or anything else. You really want to figure that out before, because it's going to put a lot more wear on every component of your airsoft gun, and this really is a band-aid fix. It's not an answer. Okay, so you might have also noticed that these two connectors are different, and these are two connectors that you're going to see a lot in airsoft. This one is called the Mini Tamiya connector, and this one is called the Dean's connector. The Mini Tamiya connector has been the standard for airsoft for a very, very long time, but it's kind of getting old at this point. It's basically a plastic shroud hiding 2 prongs inside of it. There's no way to connect these connectors in the wrong direction, by the way. This is an old style of connector. The issue with it is that the connecting prong is too thin, so if you wanted to push a lot of power through it, they also run into a little bit of reliability issues. So the industry has started to move on into the Dean's connector. This is a much better connector because it is more consistent with the contacts. It's also a wider contact, which means you can transfer more power more reliably through these Dean connectors. This mostly has to do with what's on the back end of your airsoft gun, whether it be a Tamiya or a Dean's. Really just buy the battery that fits. One thing that I really like about airsoft is that it's a very easy hobby to get started with technical skills, such as soldering and wiring and stuff like that. If your battery that you ordered was Dean's by accident and you open up and you realize your airsoft gun uses Tamiya batteries, it's a very good opportunity to rewire the back of your airsoft gun into Dean's. If you don't want to do any of the soldering, but your battery does not match the back of your airsoft gun, there is a solution for you. They do sell adapters where the back of it is a Tamiya's and the front of it is a Dean's. Will solve your issues if you bought the wrong battery. Really, the solution is make sure you do your research first, buy the right connector for your airsoft battery, because the issue with the adapter is that you're getting none of the benefits of a Dean's connector. It's just an adapter to make sure everything works correctly. All right, so enough of talking about safety and all the general uses. Let's talk about the actual numbers on these batteries. So first of all, voltage. We went over voltage. Basically, if it's a 7.4 volt battery, you have 2 cells in your battery system. If it's an 11.1 volt battery, you have 3 cells in your battery system, plus all that voltage curve stuff. Now to the more interesting stuff. You can see on my battery here, it shows 1200 mAh. What is mAh? mAh is milliamp hours. For those of you who have taken like electrical classes or whatnot, you will know that milliamps is a unit of current and that hours is just, a unit of time. Milliamp hours is how many thousandth of a amp of current you can run with an hour. Keep in mind, milliamp hours is basically current times hours. It is not currents per hour. Basically, you're multiplying your current by your time. That gives you your charge in coulombs. What does that mean for the basic airsoft player? Your milliamp hour is basically the amount of gas that you're putting in your tank, or how big your tank is. The bigger the number, the more energy you have, the longer you can play, the longer the battery will run. That's basically the gist of it. Sometimes you will see it as amp hours, so you can see on this battery it's also labeled as 1.2. That's just milliamp hours divided by 1,000 to give you amp hours. All right, now let's go into the interesting thing, the number that seemingly a lot of people don't understand. We're talking about the C rating. So what is C rating? A lot of people will tell you the C stands for current. It does not stand for current. A big misconception there. The C rating actually tells you the internal resistance of the battery. That might be very confusing, but it's basically used to calculate how much current you can safely output continuously. So if you hold down the trigger, how many amps the battery is rated to constantly put out without damaging it. So how do we calculate the current from the C rating? In a practical aspect, your C rating basically tells you how much current you can discharge within an hour. So for example, if you have a 1.2 amp hour battery, a C rating of 1 means that it can discharge 1.2 amps for an hour. For example, if you had a C rating of 25, you can calculate how much current the battery is comfortable with drawing using your C rating and your milliamp hours. The way you calculate that is that you just multiply your 1.2 amp hours by 25. That gives you the current that you're comfortable constantly outputting. So again, the easiest way to put it is that if you want to find the maximum amount of current that your battery is comfortable providing, all you have to do is multiply the first number, 1.2 amp hours, by your C, for example 25, and then you'll be able to get the maximum amount of current that the battery is comfortable discharging. Okay, so how does that help me? Well, different airsoft guns with different upgrades will need different amount of currents for its motor to get everything working comfortably. In practice, usually stock airsoft guns with no upgrades generally range between 20 and 25 amps of current. So if the number that you calculated is more than 20 to 25, you're in a good spot with your LiPo battery. If you have an upgraded battery, or if you have an upgraded airsoft gun, be it you have a stronger spring, more powerful motor, lower gear ratios on your gearbox, you'll find that you're going to need a lot more power draw from your battery. Usually we're looking around like 30 to 35, even 40 amps, depending on how well tuned your airsoft gun is. This is why calculating the amount of current is so important. If you end up having a battery that is able to provide less current than your airsoft gun demands, your LiPo battery will try to provide that current, but it will not like it. Basically what this leads to is that your battery will start heating up, and a battery that starts getting really hot is a battery that is losing its lifespan, basically. Big no-no, don't want that to happen. So if you want to choose the right battery, make sure you just do that basic calculation, and you're in the right spot. Okay, so I talked about the battery heating up in the previous section. Let's talk about why the battery heats up when you have a under-spec'd battery. Let's just dive into more detail. This is going to be a little bit more detail oriented and not that important, so feel free to skip this part. The reason why your battery heats up is because the C rating is actually measuring your internal resistance of your battery. In a circuit for airsoft, there are two main resistances in the system. One is the resistance in your motor, one is the resistance in your airsoft battery. Now, across each resistance, there's going to be a voltage drop. You will notice that the voltage will drop a little bit with your airsoft battery, as well as drop to 0 at your airsoft motor. Now, resistance also leads into dissipation of energy. When you're dealing with your motor, all of that resistance is used to spin the motor, as well as a little bit of heating up the motor. It's lost as heat. This is why if you have really beefy systems and you pull the trigger on these motors, you will notice that your motor will heat up a little bit in your grip. Same goes for the airsoft battery. The airsoft battery has a little bit of built-in resistance as well, and the bigger the resistance is, the more voltage you're going to lose just at the battery, and the more energy is being lost and transferred into heat for your airsoft battery. So in order to lose as much or as little voltage as possible at the battery and shrink the amount of heat that's being generated at your battery, you want the lowest amount of resistance possible at your battery. This will also mean there's a higher voltage drop at your motor, which means your motor will be more powerful. You do this by looking for a C rating that is a very, very high number. The higher the C rating, the less the internal resistance of your battery is. The lower the C rating, the more internal resistance of the battery is, the higher it heats up, the less power to your motors. So that's the general explanation, an in-depth guide to what like C rating really affects everything in the motor system. If you want to know more about how motors work specifically, an in-depth guide to motors, what does the RPM, the TPA, and all the specs mean on motors, let me know. I can have a video about that as well. But you know, only if you're interested in that. All right, let's talk about lithium-ion batteries. This is a lithium-ion battery. Specifically, it's a lithium-ion battery cell. As you can see, just like LiPos, they are also 3.4 volts per cell. You might have seen this before. They're pretty commonly used in flashlights, electric skateboard, e-bike, e-scooter batteries. They all use cells like these. You link them up together. This is 3.7 volts. You got another 3.7 that gives you a 7.4. You got another 3.7 volts, and you get a 11.1 battery, very similar to a LiPo. And that is basically what Titan uses for their batteries. You can see in this diagram right here, you can actually see the individual cells that comprise a 11.1 volt battery. So what are some pros and cons about lithium-ion batteries? Well, lithium-ion batteries actually have a pretty big capacity for their size, where a regular LiPo, you're generally looking between a 1.2 milliamp or amp hour to a 1.6 amp hour battery. Lithium-ion batteries easily can make 3 amp hours, depending on which cell that you use. So they're very good for capacity. You can play the entire day with them. So these batteries tend to have pretty low C ratings. We're talking in the range of like 10 to 15 C. But keep in mind that the C rating is actually only half of the equation when it comes to the power that it can output. This can contain up to like 3 amp hours of energy, almost double what the LiPo can. So when you do the math out, 3 amp hours times 15C, that still gives you around 45 amps of current, which is way more than enough for a lithium ion battery. The other thing about lithium ion batteries is that they don't actually have as big of an issue with fire protection that LiPos do, meaning that these are relatively safer and more stable than lithium polymer batteries. So let's talk about the cons of these batteries. Much like LiPo batteries, you'll notice that lithium ion batteries also need a balance charger because they have a second charging port. They charge very similarly, but it is something else you should keep in mind. Something unique to lithium ion batteries is that as they're stored, they will actually slowly lose charge over time. This also happens in lithium polymer batteries, but it's much more prominent in lithium ion batteries. This means if you store your battery for a very, very long time, you'll find that the charge is actually much lower than when you left it. A few more cons about the lithium ion battery. Lithium ion batteries are usually very big and very bulky. You can imagine a very powerful lithium polymer battery is about this size. Now you can imagine equivalent 11.1 volt lithium polymer battery will need 3 of these cells linked in series together, and they're usually much bigger. A length like this might not always fit in a buffer tube, and even if you split it up like Titan does, like this, depending on the size, it might not even fit in your gun. And last thing to know about lithium ion batteries is that right now I see that they're relatively expensive compared to lithium polymer batteries. Now, I will say that, again, these prices do buy you more performance. You're basically getting the maximum capacity for the battery with the same or even better current output that you can with a lithium polymer battery, and less volatility and less fire risk. So it's up to you to weigh these decisions whether or not they're the best for you. Alrighty, so that was a pretty long explanation, and that does it for the overview of all of these batteries. To finish up, I'll give you specific recommendations on when to use which battery depending on what your needs are. The go-to battery I will recommend are lithium polymer batteries. Provided that you take good care of these, they will be the best performing battery and best bang for your buck. If your system can allow it, if you have a MOSFET, shoot for the 11.1 volt LiPo batteries. I'd like to see a C rating between 25 to 30. The maximum, or the larger the C rating, the better. But keep in mind, this also has to do with the milliamp hours and how big your battery is as well. If you're very worried about taking care of your LiPo batteries and you don't want to worry about the danger that comes with them, I would recommend the nickel metal hydride batteries, provided you can get like a high output, good quality battery. These aren't a terrible choice, especially if you're very worried about taking care of LiPo. So I would buy this if you're only worried about ease of use, you want the simplest battery, go for these. Just keep in mind they won't give you the best performance. You should buy lithium polymer batteries if you want the peak performance. Now, keep in mind this does have a cost and price. So especially if you're playing all day, this will be very, very helpful because you won't have to completely recharge it in the middle of the game. They are also the best in current output, depending on which one that you get. The only downside is that they're going to be a little bit more expensive, but you are getting a lot of benefits from it, so it's up to you to decide that. Alrighty, so that does it for this video, guys. I know it's a super long video. I hope it was very, very informative. I hope you learned a lot of new information, something that you might not have known before. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. Any suggestions or anything like that for a future video, please leave those in the comments below. I appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.